It's been incredibly insightful for me growing up, watching her leadership in that role.
The House of Windsor, long perceived as untouchable, has shattered its own myths in a stunning display of accountability that has left the British public breathless. March 10th, 2026, will be remembered as the day the Crown delivered a message of unflinching authority. Privilege, lineage, and celebrity cannot shield one from the cold hand of justice. In a move both surgical and symbolic, Prince William, guided by the relentless discipline of the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, dismantled the protective veneer surrounding Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, exposing cracks that the public had long suspected but never seen so brutally illuminated. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, the sisters' carefully curated personas of poise and refinement collapsed under the weight of incontrovertible evidence, the remnants of their public image disintegrating as if by gravity itself. Eugenie, once the darling of the media for her charm and approachable demeanor, was confronted with documents, testimony, and forensic audits that painted a starkly different picture, one of active complicity, financial entanglement, and willful proximity to a network of illicit influence that stretched to the shadows of Jeffrey Epstein's empire. Beatrice, similarly ensnared, so the hard reality of her tenure as a UK trade envoy transformed into a public indictment of trust betrayed, where ceremonial appearances and glossy headlines could no longer mask the cold ledger lines and offshore accounts now laid bare. The palace's announcement stripped them of titles, honorary military roles, and charitable patronages, effectively erasing decades of prestige in a single stroke, while simultaneously installing the Princess of Wales, Catherine, and the newly elevated cadre of Lady Louise and the Earl of Wessex, James, as living symbols of the monarchy's moral reboot. In private, the psychological toll has been devastating. Sources describe Eugenie in panic, isolated in her Portuguese residence, pacing corridors that echo with the inevitability of exposure, forced to confront the ramifications of decades of familial privilege colliding with modern transparency. The collapse is not merely symbolic. It is logistical and procedural, a purge of professional networks, charitable associations, and even domestic stability. Jack Brooksbank, her husband, finds himself ensnared in the fallout, unable to clear the ethics checks imposed by the palace's forensic auditing team, his own career and personal credibility under siege. Beatrice, once the image of confident composure, is now reportedly withdrawn, aware that the narrative spun for years by courtiers and press alike has been irrevocably rewritten. The sisters' social and professional universe has contracted into a vacuum of scrutiny, where every decision, every association, every financial transaction is a potential flashpoint for further public condemnation. Yet the purge is not merely retributive, it is preventative. William and Anne's decisive intervention is a declaration that the monarchy will no longer harbor any risk, no matter how closely blood is tied to the throne. The mechanisms of power have shifted. Transparency is now weaponized, ethics audits act as sieves for moral clarity, and the once sacrosanct shield of royal tradition has been reproposed to enforce accountability. As Catherine steps into the public eye with poise and unshakable composure, the contrast could not be starker. Where the York sisters flounder in panic and exposure, the new order projects stability, rigor, and the unassailable authority of a crown untainted by scandal. From the erasure of the York brand in official calendars to the severing of financial ties that span continents, the message is clear. The monarchy's survival depends not on loyalty to blood, but fidelity to principle. Every charitable initiative, diplomatic engagement, and public appearance that the sisters once commanded has been methodically reallocated, creating an institutional firewall against the recurrence of past missteps. The broader implications ripple far beyond family drama, signaling to international partners, corporate entities, and the Commonwealth itself that the House of Windsor has embraced a model of radical accountability. Yet amid this strategic calculus lies the human drama, the panicked isolation of Eugenie, the private humiliation of Beatrice, and the acute awareness that the world is watching as the sisters navigate a labyrinth of disgrace from which there is no return. In documenting this unprecedented unraveling, the story is not merely of exposure, but of transformation, a monarchy confronting its past, excising its liabilities, and asserting a future defined by transparency, moral discipline, and the ruthless prioritization of institutional survival. This is a moment when appearances end, realities collide, and the true architecture of power within the British monarchy is laid bare for the world to witness. The British monarchy has faced scandals before, but never with the intensity, precision, and public clarity witnessed on March 10, 2026. On that day, the House of Windsor executed a purge so definitive that it redefined what it means to belong to the royal family. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, once pillars of the York lineage, the symbols of a subtle, quietly influential branch of the crown, found themselves unmasked, exposed, and cast into the shadows of history. Their carefully constructed identities, built on charm, titles, and public goodwill, crumbled under the relentless weight of forensic evidence and institutional resolve. Prince William, guided by the iron will of Princess Anne, orchestrated a strategy that left no room for excuses, no space for deflection. The sisters were confronted with the truth in its most unvarnished form, years of entanglement with a network linked to Jeffrey Epstein, hidden offshore accounts, questionable business dealings, and a habitual reliance on the immunity provided by royal blood were no longer tolerable. The palace, in a single, sweeping stroke, removed their military affiliations, charitable patronages, and official royal titles, erasing decades of influence and status in a manner both surgical and symbolic. Behind closed doors, the emotional impact has been devastating. Eugenie, once the face of youthful sophistication and modernity, has been described as panicking, isolated in her Portuguese residence, her days consumed by fear, uncertainty, and the crushing realization that her public persona was shattered overnight. Jack Brooksbank, her husband, similarly finds himself ensnared in the fallout, unable to pass the palace's rigorous ethics checks, his professional credibility undermined, and his personal life under intense scrutiny. Beatrice, who cultivated the image of a sharp, capable businesswoman, has been forced to confront the harsh reality that influence and privilege cannot shield one from the consequences of moral compromise. The sister social universe has collapsed. The corridors of Sandringham and Balmoral no longer echo with their presence, their names scrubbed from official calendars, their prior charitable engagements reassigned to figures now emblematic of a new, disciplined monarchy. This purge was not born of impulse, but of careful, calculated planning. Months of internal investigation revealed a troubling pattern. Financial maneuvers designed to obscure assets, covert involvement in sensitive intelligence, and the use of the royal seal to legitimize transactions that would otherwise invite scrutiny. The palace's forensic auditors discovered a complex web of shell companies, advisory fees, and offshore accounts tied to both sisters, revealing a network that perpetuated the Epstein legacy well beyond the shadow of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Each refusal to submit to independent audits and ethics checks became a testament to defiance, inadvertently confirming the whispers of complicity that had long circulated in private circles. In the eyes of Prince William and Princess Anne, silence was no longer neutrality, it was guilt. Every misdisclosure, every opaque transaction, every moment of avoidance signaled allegiance to secrecy over integrity. The monarchy had reached a threshold. The House of Windsor could no longer tolerate compromise within its ranks, not even from its own blood. The broader ramifications of this purge are profound. The removal of Beatrice and Eugenie sends an unmistakable signal to the global community. The British monarchy is committed to transparency, accountability, and the prioritization of institutional integrity over personal privilege. International partners, corporate stakeholders, and charitable organizations have been instructed to sever all legacy ties with the former York princesses. This is more than damage control. It is a proactive, generational recalibration. The Princess of Wales, Catherine, now emerges as the embodiment of moral clarity and stability, alongside the Duchess of Edinburgh, Sophie, Lady Louise, and the Earl of Wessex, James. Together, they symbolize the monarchy's commitment to a new ethos, one where titles are not shields, but responsibilities, where transparency is not optional, and where the failures of the past serve as lessons, not shields. The psychological and personal cost of the York sisters cannot be overstated. Their lives, once buffered by royal privilege and familial deference, are now defined by surveillance, scrutiny, and isolation. The very relationships that sustain them have become sources of tension. Family gatherings, once spaces of comfort, have turned into arenas of exclusion. Public appearances, once carefully choreographed to project grace and continuity, have vanished, replaced by digital speculation, investigative journalism, and relentless social media scrutiny. Eugenie's panic is a stark contrast to the poised, confident image she once projected, a visual and emotional manifestation of a dynasty's decisive will. Beatrice, meanwhile, faces the daunting task of reconstructing her identity in a world that now views her with suspicion, her professional network severed, her public credibility fractured. The strategic brilliance of this purge lies not only in its execution, but in its symbolism, where the York sisters represented opacity, entitlement, and the lingering taint of scandal. The emerging cadre embodies transparency, competence, and unwavering loyalty to the Crown's renewed ethical framework. The palace's emphasis on independent audits, rigorous ethics checks, and proactive oversight establishes a blueprint for governance within the monarchy that is unprecedented in modern history. It signals to future generations that privilege alone will no longer dictate access or authority. Moral clarity, adherence to standards, and a commitment to the Crown's reputation are now non-negotiable today as we witness the unraveling of Beatrice and Eugenie's world. The implications extend far beyond familial discord. This is a story of systemic reform, a monarchy confronting the consequences of past complicity and taking decisive action to ensure institutional survival. The sisters' public personas, meticulously curated over decades, are reduced to case studies in the perils of opacity and the fragility of inherited power. Meanwhile, the monarchy's future is being actively curated, a disciplined, transparent, and resilient institution emerging from a crucible of scandal, ready to assert its relevance in a 21st century world where ethical accountability is no longer optional. The House of Windsor has chosen survival, clarity, and public trust over familial loyalty, and in doing so, has reshaped the monarchy forever. The British monarchy, for centuries a symbol of stability and continuity, has endured countless crises, yet none has shaken its foundations like the events of March 10, 2026. That morning, the world witnessed an unprecedented display of institutional authority, one that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, the corridors of Westminster, and every household attuned to royal affairs. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, once celebrated as the approachable faces of a modernized royal branch, found themselves stripped of their titles, their military affiliations, their charitable patronages, and, most importantly, their shield of perceived immunity. The House of York, long tolerated under the leniency of the late Queen Elizabeth II, had crossed a line that the new generation of the monarchy, under Prince William and Princess, and could no longer overlook. The catalyst for this dramatic rupture were both personal and institutional. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's arrest on February 19, 2026, under charges tied to misconduct and criminal complicity, was a spark, but the fire had been smoldering for decades. Evidence revealed not just Andrew's failings, but a structural network of secrecy and influence that extended through his daughters. Investigators, combing through properties in Norfolk and Berkshire, discovered that both Beatrice and Eugenie had maintained suspicious proximity to the financial and operational infrastructure of Jeffrey Epstein. Documents released by U.S. authorities shattered the narrative of innocence, painting a portrait of active engagement and the leveraging of royal status for personal and professional gain. Beatrice, once regarded as a ceremonial envoy to international trade missions, was implicated in funneling sensitive geopolitical intelligence, a breach that, in any other context, would have provoked immediate governmental censure. Eugenie's involvement, once minimized in public discourse, emerged as equally critical, a pattern of repeated connections to opaque financial networks and offshore shell companies that tied directly to Epstein-linked operations. Faced with this reality, Prince William acted decisively, guided by the unyielding principles of Princess Anne. The palace's internal investigation culminated in a purge that was as strategic as it was public. The sisters were confronted with the palace's forensic audit findings, a labyrinthine map of financial activity spanning from 2018 to the present, involving hundreds of millions of pounds in transactions funneled through entities with no tangible output. Advisory fees, silent equity holdings, and high-interest loans formed a web that was now fully exposed. The ethics check, a mechanism designed to confirm loyalty and transparency, became the final test. Refusal to comply, whether motivated by fear, pride, or desperation, served as self-incrimination. Silence was no longer neutral. Inaction equated to complicity. The palace, having exhausted all avenues of private negotiation and persuasion, proceeded with surgical precision. The York sisters' titles were revoked, their patronages reassigned, and their official standing within the monarchy terminated. The psychological fallout was immediate and visible. Eugenie, once celebrated for her poise and charm, was described by insiders as in a state of near panic. Confined to her residence in Portugal, she faced an unprecedented level of scrutiny, both public and private. Jack Brooksbank, her husband, found himself unable to satisfy the palace's rigorous financial disclosure requirements, adding tension and strain to their marital life. Beatrice, who had cultivated an image of corporate competence and sophisticated diplomacy, was forced to confront the collapse of her professional networks and the abrupt end of her influence. The sisters' public appearances, once meticulously choreographed, vanished overnight, replaced by a silence that spoke volumes. Exclusion from royal ascot, removal from official events, and the severing of charitable affiliations symbolized not only the end of privilege but the beginning of total containment. The purge extended beyond personal humiliation. Institutional realignment was equally meticulous. The Princess of Wales, Catherine, emerged as a central figure of the new order, projecting calm authority, moral clarity, and an unshakable public presence. Alongside her, the Duchess of Edinburgh, Sophie, Lady Louise, and the Earl of Wessex, James, represented a carefully curated cohort committed to transparency, accountability, and disciplined stewardship of royal responsibilities. Every engagement previously handled by the York sisters, whether diplomatic, charitable, or ceremonial, was reassigned with precision, signaling to the world that the monarchy was purging not only individuals but practices. Corporate partners such as BT and Barclays received direct communications from the palace's transparency office, terminating all legacy contracts associated with Beatrice and Eugenie. Prestigious universities, philanthropic organizations, and international partners followed suit, severing relationships to avoid association with the Epstein-tainted legacy. The purge symbolism was intentional. Where the York sisters had embodied opacity, familial entitlement, and the lingering threat of scandal, Catherine and the new cadre represented transparency, integrity, and disciplined service. The monarchy's message was unmistakable. Privilege and bloodline are no longer shields. Accountability and loyalty are paramount. The palace had weaponized transparency itself, using it not only to cleanse the institution but to preempt further crises. The new ethics framework, including forensic audits, rigorous compliance standards, and full financial disclosure, established a precedent unparalleled in modern monarchical history. Even as the public witnessed this institutional recalibration, the personal toll on the York sisters remained profound. Isolation, public scrutiny, and the collapse of their professional lives created a pressure cooker of stress and uncertainty. Eugenie's private defense of her father, once a gesture of loyalty, now exacerbated her estrangement from the monarchy. Beatrice's attempts to maintain a professional and philanthropic presence were systematically dismantled by the exposure of her financial and operational networks. Their social universe, previously buffered by titles and public goodwill, contracted to a vacuum of scrutiny. Surveillance, media attention, and the relentless digital gaze of watchdog accounts like the Exposing Royals network ensured that no private action went unnoticed. Every financial transaction, personal choice, and public appearance was now a matter of institutional and public record. The broader implications of this purge extend far beyond family dynamics. By removing Beatrice and Eugenie from positions of influence, Prince William and Princess have set a precedent for the monarchy as an institution. No member is untouchable, no family tie is immune, and no legacy is above scrutiny. The purge signals a generational shift, a radical restructuring of governance and ethical standards within the House of Windsor. It represents a conscious pivot from a monarchy that tolerated opacity and privilege to one that prioritizes transparency, ethical conduct, and institutional resilience. The lessons are both immediate and enduring. Secrecy is liability, silence is complicity, and survival depends on the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Regardless of lineage or status, as the York sisters navigate the collapse of their public and private worlds, the monarchy advances, projecting an image of stability, moral authority, and disciplined stewardship. Catherine's poised public appearances, Sophie's discreet competence, and the active roles of Lady Louise and James symbolize a new era, one in which the monarchy actively curates its own narrative and fortifies itself against scandal. The purge has been both punishment and preventative measure, severing ties that threaten the crown's legitimacy while establishing a model for ethical governance that will resonate for decades. The House of Windsor, once perceived as a refuge of privilege and insulation, has demonstrated through this unprecedented crisis that its survival depends on adaptability, transparency, and ruthless attention to ethics. The exposure of Beatrice and Eugenie, the stripping of their roles, and the realignment of royal duties are not mere scandal. They are institutional strategy. The monarchy has chosen clarity over comfort, principle over blood, and the future over the ghosts of the past. This historic purge marks a watershed moment. The York era is over. The Epstein stain has catalyzed reform, and the crown has emerged stronger, more disciplined, and unequivocally focused on a continued relevance in a world that no longer tolerates secrecy or moral compromise. The York sisters' fall from grace is a cautionary tale, a story of privilege undone by transparency and ethics. For the monarchy, it is a triumph, an affirmation of values over heritage, and a blueprint for the governance of a modern institution. The purge of March 2026 will be remembered not as a family quarrel, but as a decisive, principled act of preservation, the moment the House of Windsor chose survival, integrity, and accountability over tradition and unowned immunity. The sisters' panic, isolation, and unraveling serve as both spectacle and lesson, a human story etched into the broader narrative of monarchical reform, ensuring that the era of secrecy, entitlement, and moral compromise has finally ended.